Just the news of Genghis Khan's army made whole cities surrender. This was the true power of Genghis Khan. He did not only build the largest land empire in history, he also used fear as his greatest weapon. His enemies were not only defeated in battle, they were broken in spirit. Fear traveled faster than his soldiers, and it made people give up before the fight even started. But how did he create so much fear? And what secret methods did the Mongols use to control the world? Let's find out in this story. This was not simply about winning battles. It was about breaking the spirit of entire populations before a single arrow was fired. Think about the chill that runs down your spine when you hear a ghost story. Now imagine that ghost story is real, and it is marching towards your home. That was the reputation of the Mongol army. But how did fear become such a powerful tool of empire? How did a group of horsemen from the Asian steppes turn human dread into a weapon that conquered vast lands? Tonight, we uncover the story of Genghis Khan and his empire of terror. This is not just about battles or conquests. It is about a deep understanding of human psychology twisted into a system of control. Before we dive into the chilling methods that built this vast empire, I have a question for you. Have you ever heard a story that made you truly understand the immense power of fear? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you find this journey through history compelling, please hit that like button and subscribe. Your support helps us tell more of these dark and often misunderstood tales. Our story begins in 1206. A man named Temujin had done something amazing. He had brought together all the different, often fighting, Mongol tribes. This was a huge task. The Mongol people lived on vast, open lands called the steppe. Life there was incredibly hard. Tribes often fought each other for food, water, and grazing land for their animals. Survival meant being tough and often cruel. Temujin had seen much bloodshed and betrayal in his own life. He knew that for his people to survive and grow strong, they needed to stop fighting each other. He needed to unite them under one strong banner. When he finally brought all the tribes together, they gave him a new name. He became Genghis Khan. This name meant universal ruler. It was a powerful title for a powerful man. From that moment, his vision was clear. He would not just rule the Mongols, he would rule the world. His empire grew incredibly fast. It stretched from the Pacific Ocean in the east all the way to Europe in the west. This was an empire bigger than any other in history, all built by a horseman who could move faster than anyone. But it was not just speed or numbers that made his armies unstoppable. More than battles, it was pure fear that made cities open their gates without a fight. The stories of Mongol cruelty traveled far and wide. They reached cities long before the Mongol horsemen did. These stories broke the spirit of people, making them feel hopeless. People would hear about what happened to other cities, and they would rather surrender than face the same fate. This clever use of reputation was a key part of Genghis Khan's plan. It saved his army time and lives, making his conquest even faster and more efficient. It was a strategy based on showing extreme cruelty to a few. So many others would simply give up. Life on the steppe was not just tough. It was a constant fight for survival. To live in such a harsh land, people needed very strict rules. Genghis Khan understood this better than anyone. He created a detailed law code called the Yasa. This law was not just a list of rules. It was a way of life, enforced with absolute, unbending power. The Yasa made sure that every single Mongol warrior followed orders without question. It made sure everyone knew their place and what would happen if they stepped out of line. This code was the backbone of the Mongol army's discipline. The Yasa was very, very strict. It had harsh punishments for even small mistakes. For example, if one soldier ran away from a fight, his entire unit could be punished. This meant not just a few people, but everyone in his group could be killed. Imagine the fear this created. Every soldier knew that his life and the lives of his friends depended on the bravery of every other soldier. This created a strong bond, but it was a bond built on shared fear. No one wanted to be the reason for their unit's death. No one dared to run. This system taught absolute loyalty and total obedience. It meant that every soldier would fight to the death because the cost of failure was too high for everyone. This shared fear made the Mongol army incredibly disciplined and terrifyingly effective. Genghis Khan also had a special way of punishing noble enemies. In many cultures, there was a belief that royal or noble blood should not touch the ground. It was seen as sacred. The Mongols used this belief to create truly gruesome and unusual executions. These punishments were not just about killing someone. They were designed to inflict maximum terror and humiliation, especially for those who watched. The goal was to break the spirit of any remaining resistance. One common method was crushing. Noble prisoners would be placed umlos, to large wooden platforms. Then, the Mongols would hold a victory feast on top of these platforms. They would eat, drink, and celebrate, while slowly the weight of the platform crushed the noble to death below. It was a slow, agonizing end. The nobles' screams would be heard by their families and countrymen, who were often forced to watch. This was a horrifying spectacle, showing the total power of the Mongols over even the highest-ranking enemies. It was a public display of power and cruelty. Another method involved carpets and horses. Noble prisoners would be tightly wrapped in carpets. Then they would be placed on the ground, and Mongol horses would repeatedly trample them. This was also a slow and painful death. The bodies would be broken and mangled, but again, the noble blood would not touch the ground directly. It was a twisted way to respect a cultural belief while still carrying out a barbaric execution. It added a layer of psychological torture to the physical pain. Sometimes, nobles were sewn into sacks made of felt or thick cloth. These sacks were then left out in the blazing sun. The sun's heat would slowly shrink the sack. The person inside would slowly suffocate or die of thirst and heat stroke. This was a long, agonizing death filled with panic and despair. Imagine being trapped, feeling the sack get tighter and tighter, unable to move, waiting for death in the burning sun. The psychological horror of this method was immense. For particularly hated leaders, the Mongols used molten silver. Hot liquid silver would be poured into their eyes and ears. This would cause unimaginable pain and instant blindness and deafness. The silver would harden inside the body, leaving a horrifying image. This punishment was reserved for those who had deeply angered Genghis Khan or his commanders. It was a gruesome way to silence an enemy forever, to destroy their senses, and to send a chilling message to anyone who dared to speak against the Mongols. Forcing families to watch these brutal punishments was key. It was not just about the death of one person. It was about breaking the spirit of entire families and communities. The memory of such horrors would stay with people for generations, crushing any thought of future rebellion. This was Genghis Khan's way of ensuring that fear lived on, long after the executioner's work was done. When cities resisted the Mongol army, the consequences were terrible. Genghis Khan wanted to make sure that no other city would ever think of fighting back. So, when a city chose to resist, everyone suffered. The Mongols would make an example of them, a message written in blood and fear for all other cities to see. One of the most famous and horrifying examples was the city of Merv. This was a rich and important city, and it dared to stand against the Mongols. When the Mongols finally broke through its defenses, they showed no mercy. Historians say that at Merv, each Mongol soldier was ordered to kill hundreds of people. This was not a random massacre. It was a systematic wiping out of almost an entire population. The people were gathered in fields outside the city walls. Then, the Mongol soldiers began the slaughter. Men, women, and children were killed in cold blood. The numbers are almost impossible to imagine, but some accounts say hundreds of thousands of people died. It is a true act of genocide. After the killing, the Mongols would build gruesome skull pyramids. They would pile up the skulls of the dead in huge mounds outside the city. These pyramids were not just symbols of death, they were giant, visible warnings. Any traveler approaching Merv would see these pyramids long before they reached the city itself. The message was clear. This is what happens if you resist the Mongols. These horrifying monuments were designed to spread terror across vast distances. They were silent, yet screamed a message of absolute power and ruthless punishment. Sometimes, a few survivors were deliberately left alive. These people were not spared out of mercy. They were released to spread the stories of terror. They would wander into other towns and villages, their eyes wide with horror, telling everyone what they had seen. Their tales of slaughter and skull pyramids would travel faster and further than any Mongol horseman. These survivors were living proof of Mongol brutality, carrying the seeds of fear to every corner of the land. They were unwitting agents of terror, breaking the will of future enemies. Later, in 1258, a different Mongol leader, Hulagu Khan, who was Genghis Khan's grandson, sacked the great city of Baghdad. This was another terrible example of Mongol cruelty. Baghdad was the capital of the Islamic Golden Age. It was a center of learning, art, and science. It had the famous House of Wisdom, a library filled with countless books and writings. When the Mongols attacked, they destroyed everything. They burned the House of Wisdom. The Tigris River, which flowed through Baghdad, was said to have run black with the ink from all the destroyed books. This was not just a loss of life, it was a loss of knowledge, culture, and centuries of human progress. The destruction of Baghdad sent a clear message. No city, no matter how great or rich, was safe from Mongol wrath. The scale of death and destruction at Baghdad was immense, and it showed the world that the Mongols would not hesitate to destroy entire civilizations if they stood in their way. The Mongol terror was not just about killing people or destroying cities. It also attacked the very heart of a people's identity, their culture, and their faith. When the Mongols swept through lands, they often targeted religious places. Mosques, churches, and temples were not respected. Instead, they were often turned into stables for Mongol horses. Imagine the shock and horror of local people seeing their holy places, where they worshipped God, being used for animals. This was a deep insult. It was a way to show that their gods were powerless against the Mongols. It was a message that no spiritual belief could protect them. The Mongols also systematically destroyed books and art. Libraries, which held centuries of knowledge and stories, were burned. Beautiful artworks, created with great skill and devotion, were smashed or taken away. This was a way to erase a people's history and their sense of who they were. Without their stories and their art, it was harder for people to remember their past or to feel proud of their culture. It left them feeling empty and lost. Scholars and priests were also humiliated. These were the respected leaders of their communities. They held great wisdom and guided their people. The Mongols would often parade them through the streets, dressed in rags, or force them to do menial tasks. This public humiliation stripped away their authority and dignity. It showed the common people that even their wisest and holiest leaders could not stand against the Mongols. This left people feeling utterly alone and without guidance. The message was clear: no place was safe, and no belief could protect you. The Mongols wanted to crush not just armies, but also the spirit and identity of the people they conquered. They wanted to make people believe that the Mongol way was the only way, and that all other ways were weak and useless. This systematic destruction of culture and faith was a powerful tool of psychological warfare. It made people feel that their entire world had been turned upside down, and that there was no hope left to cling to. Genghis Khan's tactics extended beyond human-made weapons. He often used nature itself as a tool of torture and death. The vast and harsh landscapes through which the Mongols rode became a part of their horrifying arsenal. These methods were designed to inflict slow, agonizing suffering, often playing on the natural environment to break the victim's will and spread maximum terror. One terrible method involved burying victims in sand. Prisoners would be buried up to their necks in the hot desert sand. They would be left exposed to the blazing sun, slowly dying from thirst, heat stroke, and the crushing weight of the sand. The slow pace of this death, combined with the feeling of helplessness, was truly cruel. It was a terrible way to die, often taking days for the body to finally give out. The victims would suffer unimaginable pain and fear, knowing their end was coming but unable to do anything about it. In the cold winters, the Mongols would sometimes leave prisoners to freeze to death. These victims would be tied up and left outside in the freezing cold until their bodies turned into ice statues. This was a slow and agonizing death. The cold would first numb the body, then slowly shut down its functions. Imagine the shivering, the frostbite, the slow loss of feeling, until finally the heart stopped. It was a chilling reminder of the Mongols' power over life and death, using the harshest elements of nature against their enemies. Others were forced on long death marches. Prisoners, often already weak and wounded, would be made to walk for days or even weeks without proper food, water, or rest. They would march until they dropped from exhaustion, starvation, or disease. These marches were not just about moving prisoners. They were designed to be a form of torture, slowly breaking the body and spirit of the victims. Each fallen prisoner served as a warning to those still struggling to go on. Some of the most extreme methods involved animals. Victims were sometimes sewn into the carcasses of freshly killed animals, like horses or cows. The heat inside the carcass, the stench, and the lack of air would cause a slow and terrible death. As the carcass decomposed, the trapped person would suffer unspeakably. Often, these bodies would then be left for wild predators. This was the ultimate act of dehumanization. It reduced a human being to mere animal meat, to be consumed by other animals. It was a horrifying way to destroy a person's dignity even in death. In deserts, where water was precious, the Mongols sometimes used a truly cruel psychological torture. They would place water just out of reach of dying prisoners. The victims could see the water, could smell it, could long for it, but could not touch it. This turned hope itself into a form of torture. The promise of relief, so close yet so far, would break a person's spirit faster than anything else. These acts showed that the Mongols understood how to use every element of their world, even the environment itself, to spread terror and break the will of their enemies. Beyond physical torture, the Mongols also used disease and rumors as weapons. They understood that fear could spread a message faster and more effectively than any army. Sometimes, they didn't even need to fight a battle to make a city surrender. The threat alone, or the clever use of rumors, was enough to break down resistance. One terrible tactic involved throwing dead bodies into besieged cities. These bodies were often infected with diseases. By throwing them over the city walls, the Mongols aimed to spread sickness among the people inside. This was an early form of biological warfare. The sight of rotting corpses, combined with the rapid spread of illness, would cause panic and despair. People would die from disease, and the survivors would be too weak and terrified to fight. This method made a city defeat itself from the inside out through fear of infection and death. Sometimes, the Mongols didn't even need to use actual disease. They only needed to spread rumors. They would let stories travel ahead of their army, tales of poisoned wells or deadly plagues carried by their warriors. These rumors alone were often enough to make cities surrender. Imagine hearing that an army known for its brutality is approaching, and then hearing that they poison all the water sources. People would panic. They would rather open their gates and hope for mercy than face a slow, painful death from disease and thirst. This showed how well the Mongols understood human psychology. They knew that fear worked even without fighting. It could cripple a city, break its will, and force it to surrender without the Mongols losing a single soldier. The fear of what might happen, or what was rumored to be happening, was just as powerful as the reality of a battle. This strategic use of misinformation and terror helped the Mongols conquer vast territories with surprising speed and efficiency. It turned public panic into a key element of their military strategy, saving them effort while increasing their reputation for terror. The humiliation of enemy leaders was a key part of Genghis Khan's strategy to break the spirit of conquered peoples and show absolute Mongol dominance. These acts were carefully planned spectacles designed to degrade powerful figures in the eyes of their own people and the world. It was a powerful message that no one, not even a king or a caliph, was safe from Mongol power. One of the most famous examples of this was the Caliph of Baghdad. When Baghdad fell to Hulagu Khan, a grandson of Genghis, the Caliph was captured. Instead of being killed directly, he was rolled in a carpet and trampled to death by horses. This was a twisted application of the Mongol rule that noble blood should not touch the ground. It was an agonizing and deeply humiliating end. For the people of Baghdad, seeing their spiritual and political leader suffer such a degrading death was a profound shock. It crushed their hope and symbolized the total destruction of their former way of life. Similarly, several Russian princes faced a brutal and insulting end. After a major battle, these captured princes were placed under a large wooden platform. Then, the Mongol commanders held a victory feast on top of this platform. As the Mongols celebrated their win, eating and drinking, the princes slowly died beneath them. crushed to death. This was a horrifying spectacle for any remaining Russian fighters or citizens. It showed that their leaders were not just defeated, but were used as mere objects beneath the feet of their conquerors. Their deaths became a part of the Mongol celebration, a symbol of ultimate disrespect. Sometimes, captured kings were not immediately killed. Instead, they were kept alive and made to serve as footstools for Mongol leaders. Imagine a once powerful king forced to kneel and be stepped on by his conquerors. Or they might be forced into slavery, doing menial tasks, serving their new masters. These acts of humiliation were deeply symbolic. They publicly stripped kings of their power, their dignity, and their status. This shattered the morale of their former subjects. It sent a clear message that resistance was not only futile, but would lead to the utter destruction of their leaders' honor. By making an example of these high-ranking figures, the Mongols ensured that the terror spread far and wide, making future conquests easier. These acts were not just cruel, they were a calculated display of absolute unchallengeable power. This was not random violence. Every single act was carefully planned to send a message. Genghis Khan knew that fear could travel faster than his horsemen, and it worked better than any weapon. The rumors and stories of Mongol brutality reached cities and kingdoms long before the actual army did. These tales of terror broke the will of people, making them surrender without a fight. This saved the Mongols time, resources, and soldiers. It was a military strategy built on psychological warfare, on understanding how to make people so afraid that they would give up all hope of resistance. The legacy of this organized terror would shape not only the lands the Mongols conquered, but also the way future empires would think about power and control. The impact of Genghis Khan's terror and the Mongol Empire lasted for centuries, even though the empire itself changed and eventually broke apart after less than 200 years. Its shadow was long and deep. It shaped the history of many nations and cultures in ways that are still felt today. In Russia, the Mongol rule lasted for more than 200 years. This long period greatly affected how Russia developed. The Russian princes were forced to submit to the Mongol Khans, to pay tribute, and to adopt many Mongol ways of governance. This experience is often said to have shaped a harsh and centralized style of leadership in Russia. The constant need to be strong, to control, and to demand obedience, even from one's own people, became a part of Russian leadership. The Mongol yoke left a lasting mark on Russian political culture, influencing its rulers for centuries to come. In the Islamic world, the fall of Baghdad in 1258 was a catastrophe. As we discussed, the destruction of the House of Wisdom and countless books marked the end of a golden age of learning. This was a time when Islamic scholars were leaders in science, medicine, mathematics, and philosophy. The Mongols' destruction caused an irreversible loss of knowledge and a slowdown in cultural and scientific progress in many parts of the Middle East. It took centuries for some regions to recover from this massive cultural blow. The memory of this destruction lived on, a reminder of what could be lost when an empire fell to such a brutal force. In China, the Mongols also left a lasting impact. After the Mongol Yuan dynasty was overthrown, the Chinese rulers rebuilt and strengthened the Great Wall. This massive construction project was a direct response to the Mongol threat. The Chinese wanted to defend their borders against any future invasions from the northern steppes. The Great Wall became a symbol of Chinese resistance, Shaki, and a physical reminder of the fear the Mongols had instilled. It showed that even after the Mongols were gone, the memory of their conquests continued to shape national policy and defense strategies. The military lessons from the Mongol Empire are still studied today. Their tactics of shock and awe, using overwhelming force and psychological terror to break an enemy's will, are still seen in modern military strategies. The idea that you can defeat an enemy not just by destroying their army, but by destroying their hope and their will to fight, comes directly from the Mongols. Genghis Khan's methods taught the world how powerful a weapon fear could be. His empire showed that terror, when organized and applied with ruthless efficiency, could conquer more than any number of soldiers. It was a terrifying lesson in power. The Mongol Empire itself lasted for less than 200 years as a unified entity, but its shadow, the legacy of its terror, is still deeply felt. This empire showed the world just how much damage one powerful man, using fear as his main weapon, could do. The world was changed forever by Genghis Khan and his horsemen. Entire cities vanished from the map. Places that had been centers of trade, culture, and learning were reduced to rubble and never rebuilt. Their names are sometimes only found in old history books. This physical erasure meant that generations of people, their stories, and their way of life were simply wiped out. The ground where they once stood became empty, a silent reminder of Mongol power. Beyond the physical destruction, vast amounts of knowledge were lost. When libraries burned and scholars were killed, centuries of human thought and creativity disappeared. Ancient texts, scientific discoveries, and philosophical insights were turned to ash. This loss meant that future generations had to start over, or never even knew what had been and lost. It was a wound in the progress of humanity. Generations of people carried the fear. The children and grandchildren of those who witnessed Mongol brutality grew up hearing the stories. This fear became a part of their culture, a deep-seated caution and dread passed down through families. It influenced their decisions, their leaders, and their view of the world. The psychological scars of Mongol terror were profound and long-lasting, shaping the behavior of entire societies. The Mongols showed the world how terror could be organized like a weapon. It was not random acts of cruelty, it was a deliberate, calculated system to ensure obedience and swift conquest. Genghis Khan understood that by being absolutely ruthless, he could make others surrender quickly. He understood that extreme violence, used strategically, could make his empire grow faster and last longer than by simply fighting battles. His empire was built on this horrifying foundation of fear. This was not just conquest. It was the careful and deliberate use of fear as the very foundation of an empire. If this story opened your eyes to a different kind of power, help me reach 1,000 subscribers by subscribing now. And tell me in the comments which empire's hidden history and its unique methods of control should we uncover next.